To introduce Muna Güvenç, who's an assistant professor of fine arts. And I don't know how to describe her. She's a historian, she's a social theorist, she's a scholar of urban politics, of architecture, of social movements, of nationalism. And I could keep going. But I think the best way to familiarize yourself with her work is by seeing how she combines all these different disciplines into almost an anthropological study of urban space and nationalism in southeastern Turkey, or Turkish Kurdistan. She's also a faculty affiliate to the Crown Center, and we're very pleased to have her as part of our group. So please join me in welcoming Muna to...
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for coming. I know this is not the usual time because I teach before. We have to move the time a little bit further. Today I will talk about a small portion of my broader research project. And this is the larger project is based on over 26 months of ethnographic research I conducted in Diyarbakır, Turkey between 2008 and 19, yes. And this is something that I haven't published before. I published different articles on my research, but this is something I consciously kept unpublished. And in this project, in the larger project, I study how urban planning provides opportunities to conduct political mobilization, particularly for minority groups exposed to state violence. And more specifically, I explore how in the early 2000s, pro-Kurdish parties either banned by the state or denied access to parliament through targeted legal restrictions, used urbanism and particularly municipal power to resist Turkish state's coercion and mobilize Kurdish society in the city. In this talk, I'm going to constantly be using the name pro-Kurdish party because this research I will be talking about spans focuses in between 2004 and 2016, and between this period of time, different pro-Kurdish parties with different names was banned, shut down, and reopened. So over the time, I observed that it might be sometimes confusing for the audience for which party is that party. So that's why I'm going to call it pro-Kurdish party. So historically, the Turkish government has led a decades-long crackdown on the Kurdish movement. And since the foundation of Republic in 1923, a range of state policies has exposed Kurds to ongoing campaigns of coercion and assimilation. For almost 100 years, Kurds have been barred from representation at a national level and exposed to many forms of violence. For example, in 1990, Turkish officials removed the green light from the traffic lights of Diyarbakir. You may guess why. Instead, they replaced the green light with a blue light. Here, you can see. In doing so, they aimed at preventing any possible association with the colors of Kurdistan's flag, red, yellow, and green. In fact, between 1990 and 95, for 5 years, traffic lights in Diyarbakir never displayed the green color. Beginning in 1990s, Turkish Constitutional Court banned a sequence of pro-Kurdish parties and confiscated their properties. At the same time, party members and activists have been constantly arrested or even assassinated. More recently, in 2018, according to pro-Kurdish parties' reports, as many as 5,000 of party members have been detained. At the same time, under the rule of current President Erdogan, Turkey has arrested dozens of elected mayors and parliament members who are also pro-Kurdish party members. Particularly since 2015, Erdogan's government has ordered the seizure of 38 pro-Kurdish municipalities and replaced their top officials with his own constituents. Today, 23 mayors are still in detention, and several other former mayors have escaped to outside of the country. They are escaping from the law. But there is a specific reason for the government to detain mayors of Kurdish cities, particularly the mayors of Diyarbakir, particularly in preventing the expansion of the Kurdish movement. Because if the country, Northern Kurdistan, existed, perhaps Diyarbakir would be its capital. Osman Baydemir, the former mayor of Diyarbakir and who is now outside of the country, laid the significance of holding municipal power for the Kurdish movement. Once he told me in an interview I conducted, I quote, "Inside the parliamentary system you may have 20 or 30 parliament members, but in the general legislation you don't have the power to change the law. You can only do active opposition. Since you don't have the power to change the law, with 20 people in the parliament, you don't have the power to change the spirit of the parliament. But through local administrations, you have the power to change the spirit of the city. Municipality is yours, city board is yours, and the city is yours." End of quote. In fact, despite a history of confronting state political and armed violence between 1999 and almost 2019, the pro-Kurdish party gained power at the local level by controlling municipal administrations. Actually, right after they obtained control of municipal administrations in 2019, in a span of 5 months, once again the mayors were arrested or they were taken out of power. Beginning in the early 2000s, the party, using municipal resources, managed to integrate diverse interests and identities among the society into a coherent bloc. This bloc, in turn, solidified around the politicized Kurdish identity. In this context, the country's largest Kurdish-dominated city, Diyarbakir, rose in stature to become the center of Kurdish politics. In my study, I argue that this Kurdish identity did not develop as an ethnocultural or ethno-demographic fact, as several other scholars have proposed. Rather, it developed as a political process in diverse urban settings created and governed by the pro-Kurdish party. The party embodies, as you may have already known, in Turkey, characteristics of a both movement and a political party. And since the early 2000s, the pro-Kurdish pro-Kurdish administrations in Diyarbakir have sought to channel and even recreate Kurdish society through an extraordinarily broad range of urban initiatives. And these initiatives varied from micro-internship projects for the urban poor, but also to lucrative contracts for local business people. As successful examples of alternative government action, such activities, different urban planning projects they conducted have allowed the party to forge a formidable Kurdish identity within a coherent political bloc. And this bloc encompassed an extraordinarily wide spectrum of urban residents, including students, merchants, civil servants, housewives, the unemployed, teachers, business people, university professors, farmers, as well as members of pious communities. In this sense, the party did not only capitalize on existing networks of civil society, but also creatively established new urban networks and sites of engagement, bound by very specific special activities. For each segment of the society, the party would employ a different and unique urban strategy. And today, I'm going to discuss the link between the party and the urban poor. With specific cases, I will talk how and why pro-Kurdish municipalities wanted to keep squatter settlements in the midst of the city. In 2009, Erdogan's government wanted to initiate a large urban transformation project in Diyarbakir, implemented by the Housing Development Administration of Turkey, which I will call TOKİ. The project aimed to demolish the squatters of Sur district of Diyarbakir and relocate the settlers to public housing projects to be constructed on the outskirts of the city named Çölgüzeli. So this is the historic core of Diyarbakir, where this district we call Sur. And this was the location they begin to initiate urban transformation projects. And this is the location that they proposed public housing projects. Sur is the oldest district and historic core of Diyarbakır. It is located on the banks of Tigris River, and at the time of 2010, it had 110,000 population. Right now it is lower. And dating back to 5000 BC, the urban fabric Sur was constituted by an organic growth of narrow labyrinths and serpentine alleys with dead ends, which is a very typical layout, what we call it Medina, because it's inside the city walls, and these are the city walls. Probably was made, according to historians, constructed in 500 BC, but of course they were constructed constantly in different periods of time. At the same time, Sur is the largest quarter of squatter settlements in Diyarbakır, and due to forced migrations from rural to urban in the mid-1980s and 1990s, most housing in Sur began to develop in an area of squatter settlement, and Sur sheltered thousands of settlements that have built on private land or on lots left empty by the displacement of local populations. And who was living in Sur in the past was Jews, Armenians, and it had a very diverse community. And once they begin to abandon, particularly in the beginning of the Republic, many lots remained empty, or because iteration of the houses, they were collapsed. Some of them are still live. And numerous decaying houses abandoned by previous residents were precariously built by Kurdish people who forced to migrate and seeking shelter. So, 20 miles from the city center, the new location was drastically cut from rest of the city. It was a Köy is a small town with a weak business economy. The settlers, who for the most part worked for temporary jobs in the city, who need at least 1 hour to commute and take at least 2 or 3 different public transportations to reach the town. So this is, I'm going to talk about this more, but this is the typical squatter settlements image that you are seeing, and this is a typical public housing project that the TOKİ, the Housing Administration of Turkey, built in Turkey, but this is not the project that they built because the project is still under construction. So, however, Erdogan's government was zealous in demolishing these squatter settlements and relocating the settlers of Sur into this new location. And in order to encourage citizens to relocate to the TOKİ project, the party cut down by 30% of housing prices when compared to similar projects in the rest of the country. Further, they offered subsidies covering as much as 40% of the cost, again a considerable bargain when compared to the rest of the country. The project, which was here, drew a heated reaction not only from the party and its municipalities, but also from civil society organizations aligned with the party. They all rejected this proposition of TOKİ very explicitly. And from the very first day, when Erdogan's government wanted to initiate this project in 2009, the pro-Kurdish party waged a 6-year-long political and urban battle in order to prevent the demolition of squatter settlements. One of the strategies of the municipality was to adopt a strategy to finding loopholes in the existing urban laws. At that moment, using their municipal power, the pro-Kurdish municipality claimed that Sur is a historical preservation site, so that no intervention can be done without altering and preparing preservation plan. And any changes or interventions to the area had to follow the preservation plan that the municipality would prepare. After the 2 years in 2011, following a survey of the entire built environment, Inside the city walls, the urban texture of Sur was categorized according to private property, registered historical landmarks, public enterprise, public roads, and rooms to be demolished. And according to this plan, if Toki applied its urban transformation in squatter settlements of Sur, it had to purchase the properties from their owners. Further, the plan prevented any intervention on the buildings the municipality labeled as registered landmarks. Here, the red you are seeing as the private property. So, in the meantime, they constantly give ownership and the titles to the squatter settlers. To prevent the state intervention, the municipality's second strategy was to look for alternative approaches to squatter settlements abroad, and on several occasions the municipality invited representatives of internationally renowned architecture and urban initiatives and institutes, mostly European, to organize architectural and urban workshops and develop new urban approaches with an aim to preserve the squatter settlements in the area. After a 6 years long urban battle, despite all the existing laws favoring Toki, because there's a very long battle, and as the municipality is finding the loopholes in the urban law, it's constantly Erdogan's government changing the laws favoring the housing administration and empowering the housing administration in Turkey. But at the end means by 2012, because there's another end I will be talking about, Toki was not able to demolish squatter settlements until 2015. The government was able to evict only 7% of designated area. At the same time, the pro-Kurdish party creatively turned the existing conflict into an opportunity for strengthening their popular base in the city. And despite the extraordinary compensations and bargains offered to the settlers, most of the residents resisted to be evicted. And during this period, Diyarbakır also witnessed several public demonstrations organized by the party. Between 2009 and 2015, I encountered many angry voices in Diyarbakır. When I attempt to ask about Toki's relocation plans, residents waiting to be evicted told me, I quote, "Yes, we will be given a house, but we will still be jobless. And how am I going to pay the heating and electricity there? Because usually they steal the electricity here. We will be so far away from the city, and how are we going to commute to the city and look for a job there?" This is all very relevant cases. Another resident who was a construction worker at that time noted, "There is no point for us to move those state houses. We cannot leave Sur. Our life is here. We will move to another house here." During the interviews, the settlers did not identify the houses that they were offered as social housing or public housing. For them, those housing units were merely state housing. They call the word, for those who know Turkish, devletin evleri, devlet houses. In the eyes of residents, these urban transformation projects were a state project, as several residents would use very similar phrases. As such, they amounted to another imposition for them forced upon from above. In this urban battle, in this case, like several other ones, the party and the Kurdish party supporters were on one side, and the state was on the other. In residents' minds, there were two types of state authorities. One is the state, devlet, which is referred to Turkish state, Erdogan's government, and the devlet, the state was considered as an absolute power, regardless of any ruling party other than the pro-Kurdish party. The second authority was the pro-Kurdish municipality. During daily conversations, any talk about urban transformation or housing would easily lead to comments on state's intervention and state politics over the Kurds. Nidar, a 30-year-old street vendor with a family of 6, was a migrant who came to Sur from Cizre in 1996. He was one of those residents who was offered extraordinary compensation. He told me once, I quote, "The state once burned our village. We lost our way of life and our houses there. We came here to set up a new life, and we will not let the state to do this." He is meaning to evict us. One more time, and then he was asking, who is the state? What is the state? We don't want, and he immediately jumped to another topic without me even asking. For example, he said, "We don't want municipality to collect our trashes. We don't expect any service, but we want our Kurdish identity back." So, end of quote. So here Nidar's narrative further exemplifies how residents position the role of pro-Kurdish municipality in their minds. The municipality, more than being a service provider, was seen as the defender of Kurdish rights and identity. Even in the conversations on housing, the emphasis on Kurdishness and Kurdish identity came to very foreground. For the people of Diyarbakir, TOKİ's relocation plans meant more than being simply an urban development plan detrimental to the urban poor. It was also an attack on the very Kurdish culture and Kurdish rights. Several mayors expressed this several times in local newspaper debates, speeches, and as many conversations show, this discourse seeped through and into Diyarbakirians' everyday conversations. So what I argue here, this did not happen accidentally and coincidentally in a vacuum. So I argue that this is part of a larger project of the pro-Kurdish party and how they mobilize the citizens. As I mentioned earlier, around the issue of housing, the pro-Kurdish party was able to spark mobilization and congeal solidarity in the city against the state coercion. During anti-TOKİ protests, not only Sur residents, but residents from other parts of the city would participate. A shared experience among residents sparked these protests, and the pro-Kurdish party created a sense of consent and mutual recognition through the city. It was only after the tragic battle in Sur Diyarbakir, starting in 2015 between the PKK and the Turkish army, that the government was able to intervene in the neighborhood. This time, however, this intervention was not only backed by the housing administration of Turkey, but by the Turkish military. After the armed battle concluded in March 2016, the entire Sur district was classified by the government as a disaster zone and confiscated it through the local mechanisms of urgent expropriation. At the same time, the elected mayors of Diyarbakir was detained and the trustees were appointed by the Erdogan's government. And in a span of 10 years, which began around 2009, and when it arrived to 2017 and 18, the government's urban projection in Diyarbakir was transformed from urban development into urgent expropriation using exceptional powers. But going back to 2009, it is worth asking why the pro-Kurdish municipalities sought to protect squatter settlements in the middle of the city. This practice presents a little bit of a puzzle because around the world, generally municipalities try to end urban informality in the city. The municipality of Diyarbakir tried to instead to sustain such settlements. It is also worth asking why the squatters resisted living their informal settlements and rejected the economically attractive public housing units the state offered them. In such a situation, several scholars would reason that municipalities' attempts are tied to their electoral concern of sustaining their popular base. Others would ascribe the resistance of squatter settlers to leave the informal settlements and the city center as a response to their concerns around commute accessibility and other job-related concerns. All of these reasons are very relevant. But I think the political engagement of municipalities' urban engagement of the municipality with urban informality should compel us to dig deeper. What we might ask then explains the desire to keep informal settlements in the middle of the city beyond voting or relocation concerns. How are we to understand these urban processes of squatter settlements when an oppositional party behaves like a movement and at the same time acts like a state? In the remainder of this talk, I will dig into these questions, focusing on the district of Sur, and there I will examine how squatter settlements provide a fluid backdrop for the pro-Kurdish party to design and implement programs against the central government. I will also discuss how the organizing logic of urban informality shaped the activities of the urban poor in both public and domestic spaces. By urban informality, briefly speaking, I mean the whole social, economic, and physical conditions of squatter settlements. As I mentioned earlier, Sur was the largest quarter of squatter settlements and the district where Erdogan government want to implement an urban transformation project. And oftentimes, informal settlements here, as you can see in the picture, began with an occupation of abandoned houses still owned by former residents, or through the illegal reconstruction of houses on an abandoned land that at one point had a house on it. Over time, the alteration and remodeling of these houses by new residents resulted in the transformation of traditional courtyard-centered designs, and rooms were added to others, and others use of courtyard space for new functions such as growing crops. And most housing in Sur, if not illegal, because at one point they were given titles, was at least informal and lacked the appropriate infrastructure and building codes. And in Sur, the narrow and dead-end streets lined with doorsteps were informal extensions of the houses and places where women and children talked to each other and socialized, creating an open, semi-public, private space for further interaction. These informal spaces were also sites in which strong links formed and collaboration took place. The vast majority of Sur residents are immigrants who have few or no skills for the urban job market. Most of Sur's population live below the poverty line, working largely in informal sectors or as temporary workers, as street vendors, construction workers, and daily carriers. And most women, in particular, are not literate and mostly speak and sometimes only speak Kurdish. In Sur, almost entire population have been oppressed through state interventions, such as losing their homes due to forced migration. It is also not uncommon for families to have at least one or of their family members fighting with the Kurdistan Workers' Party PKK in the mountains. And on an ordinary day in the streets, one often encounters graffiti promoting a free Kurdistan or praising the PKK, with a group of children chanting well-known Kurdish slogans such as Biji Apo, which means long live Apo. And Apo here refers to Abdullah Öcalan, who is one of the founding members of PKK and who is in jail since 1999. But during my field work, what struck me the most was, despite its highly politicized population, Sur was not isolated from the rest of the city, nor its settlers fit the category of being underclass or advanced marginality. In fact, Sur was very well connected to the rest of the city. They were active participants in the city's politics and social life. They were neither spatially alienated nor stigmatized, but rather at the center of everyday urban life with a growing sense of a politicized Kurdish community in the city. For instance, between 2008 and 2016, thousands of Sur residents resisted the state's eviction project while they were militantly refusing to pay their electricity bills. This is the state's devlet's electricity, said one of the residents. Why am I going to pay for it? In reality, the state owes this to me. The state forced us to move here. We lost our village, we lost our place, end of quote. Actually, among informal settlers in the Middle East, refusal to pay electric bill is a very common practice. Such activities are usually driven by the force of necessity who strive for a share of urban services, and quite often such responses could also be interpreted as what Asef Bayat calls, I quote, quiet encroachment, end of quote. That is, I quote, open and fleeting struggles without clear leadership, ideology, or structured organization, end of quote. However, in Sur, while also this is true, but refusal to pay the electric bill cannot be only defined as quiet encroachment, but an engaged collective action by residents and the political party. This urban condition was produced by pairing a political party and local associations within the larger politics of populist mobilization and the local struggle for political power. Because as I mentioned earlier, beginning in the 2000s, early 2000s, the pro-Kurdish municipalities found themselves enacting state power because they hold the municipalities, and municipal power is a kind of state power, against the state, which is the central government in Ankara. The early activist advocacy helped party members to establish strong links with social groups on the ground to mobilize support for the Kurdish movement. Previously, the party leaders had a very strong activist background, such as serving in administrative capacities in human rights associations, unions, and several NGOs, and these former connections helped the party to forge strong alliances with a wide-ranging organizational network at the local level. And urban informality allowed the party to perform like a movement in their everyday life communications and using oftentimes their municipal power. Almost all programs and urban activism organized by the party in squatter settlements were funded by the municipal budget. Particularly in Sur, civil society organizations funded and operated by the municipality served as bridges, providing an organizational framework in which mobilization and political articulation could occur. At the same time, the party did not only build upon existing social, economic, and cultural networks, but they also actively and strategically created new networks through local programs that ultimately articulated a coherent bloc in the city. The representatives of the neighborhood associations knew the local community and spoke Kurdish well, and they could easily communicate with local residents. The associations and the political party maintained close ties and frequently collaborating and sharing resources with the pro-Kurdish party in different areas, such as reporting violations of human rights or organizing demonstrations. Pro-Kurdish party members and activists worked face-to-face, street by street, and district by district on a foundation of personal relations. Activists were also matched to the residents in their neighborhood by gender, age, and kinship ties, benefiting from existing loyalties between friends and neighbors. One of the examples was laundry houses in Sur. From afar, these laundry houses appeared to be a very simple response by the municipality, pro-Kurdish municipality, to accommodate the needs of women in the need of wash their clothes, because several of these squatter settlements did not have the infrastructure to have the laundry. However, the organization of these laundry houses frequently went beyond simply offering a social service. Social workers who were pro-Kurdish party members worked closely with the women, and one of the social workers of the municipality said, I quote, "While easing the burdens of their life, we also strengthen women's knowledge of freedom, self-awareness, and their rights," end of quote. In these houses, while women did their laundry, they were also expected to participate in seminars organized by the municipality. These seminars were in the form of social worker-led conversations on topics varying from women's freedom and rights, human rights, Kurdish rights, as well as hygiene and childcare. Through these seminars and organizations, the party aimed to emancipate women from their traditional roles and foster self-awareness and a sense of freedom. In fact, in the everyday life of the city, laundry houses were a crucial platform for the party and also for the municipality in establishing connections with the women of the neighborhood. They were able to recruit women members for the party and through them disseminate the party ideology. Several times during my fieldwork, I saw members of these organizations participate in activities such as protesting the imprisonment of Kurdish journalists, protesting discrimination against women, and these commitments were clear in the party's agenda. Saliha, the municipal officer leading these projects, once explained, I quote, "We don't simply support women, we also encourage them to be active participants in politics." End of quote. Whether the organization had poverty elevation or cultural programs, the common theme of the seminars was around Kurdishness or struggle against the state. Oftentimes, a vocational center or a laundry house would host weekly group meetings around the theme of state violence against Kurds. I remember this moment very clearly. This is a vocational course where neighborhood women attend, but at the back you are seeing two municipality officers, and at that moment the municipality officers were inviting the women for the next day demonstration, protest, and she was giving a very strong speech. And at the same time, each street had a community leader, a representative of the pro-Kurdish party, linking neighborhood leaders in an upward chain leading to district and city leaders. And leaders of each street had constant communication with the political party, and during rallies or protests, they were responsible for gathering the neighborhood and ensuring high attendance. Typically, on nights before a protest, residents were called from their homes by knocking on their doors to engage in face-to-face conversations. On a protest day, each resident was brought to the protest area with buses provided by the municipalities. Over the span of several years, after several visits between 2009 and 2015, I saw the spectrum of these local associations expand. The local associations increased not only in number but also in content. Domestic, commercial, and social and political relations were intertwined, each becoming a resource for the other. Women organizations had grown from daily support activities like laundry houses to income-generating activities coupled with stronger political empowerment initiatives. These income-generating activities organized by the municipality were heavily embedded in very multiple dimensions of everyday domestic life and stemmed from women's abilities like cooking and baking. Women's support houses, Kadem, founded by the municipality were another example. Like several others, they did not only supported women in their daily activities, they also promoted income-generating organizational centers that connected civil society to the party. They offered informal types of home-based micro-level projects that women could undertake as a form of poverty alleviation. And most of these projects were home-based and like mushroom cultivation. Women produced or cultivated them in their courtyards, gardens, or in sheds, and these projects were initiated by the party under the Commission of Economy and Employment in collaboration with Sur municipality, because also the local municipality belongs to the party. And mushroom cultivation, like several other local-based projects, was inspired from Abdullah Öcalan's wider project of democratic confederalism. And despite he is in jail, through his attorneys, Öcalan was able to sustain his influence on the Kurdish movement. But there's something interesting here, which I want to give examples. The municipality, in a grassroots effort, was not only leading these projects, but also had a clear role facilitating this informal economy. Particularly, the municipal officers played an active role in designating the market and helping the women to sell their home-based produce. For example, women would bake tandoor breads at tandoor houses next to laundry houses and sell the bread at local markets. The municipality's assistance was not limited with the foundation of bakery houses, but they would even designate the market and assist women in selling these bread. In other words, the municipality was a facilitator of these informal bakery houses. But for the party, both being in the position of municipality and the advocates of informal economy imposed a dilemma that came at a cost. In one incident, a baker, when I was waiting in the Salihah's office, who is the social worker, a baker came. And it was a bit unusual because leading women's projects, Salihah usually had women visitors from the neighborhood. And the baker said, I quote, "Look, you have to listen us." By we, he's meaning the local bakers. "Your women's bread sales disrupt our business because you sell them so cheap to the markets. Several local markets stop buying from us," end of quote. Salihah was not expecting this complaint at the moment, and after some other conversation, Baker said, I quote, "If the women are party means like they are the supporters of the party, we are also the supporter of party. Think about us well." At that moment, Salihah immediately sent his subtext, and he immediately responded to the baker, this time from a municipality position, said, "Well, we may come and visit you for health inspection." Health inspection was a nightmare for local restaurants and bakers, but and then she didn't want to escalate the conversation, but when I follow up with the baker's situation, I learned that after several days of negotiations with local bakers, the municipality decided to organize and limit women's bread sales at select grocery stores where local bakers would not sell, but at the same time, they negotiated with the bakers to lower their bread prices. So this was an example, and to further discuss how the pro-Kurdish party was quickly shifting from the movement and using its municipal power. So, but I also want to conclude my talk, saying, in 2015, this is the destroyed neighborhoods of Sur during the war. So here it was the designated urban transformation project, but the military destruction went beyond it, and this is why I marked they begin a new hotel/housing projects, but not for the urban poor, but for middle class citizens. But they are not using local contractors. The contractors of these projects are coming from outside of Diyarbakır, because not many local contractors want to build here because it became a very tragic history. But what I also want to say is, that is the creativity of the party, I argue. While the pro-Kurdish party was sustaining the squatter settlements in the midst of the city, at the same time, for the rest of the city, they had another image to modernize Diyarbakır. So they offered lucrative contracts to local businessmen to build several housing projects and shopping malls, and this is an example of middle-class apartment blocks in Diyarbakır. So what I see, and I will leave this as emerging middle classes invested in urban spaces tailored to their lifestyles And they made speculative purchases, and I will leave this chapter of this struggle for another occasion. Thank you.
I'm curious to hear how you would contextualize this example that you offered in the larger sort of context of urban restructuring across Turkey and even globally. Because Tokyo operates all over the country, and Tokyo has done similar kinds of urban renewal projects in other places. But what do you think? How should we think about this in that larger context? And I also have a second question that's a little bit more specific. So you talked about how there's sort of an understanding among certain blockers of seeing Kurdish identity as being interchangeable with infrastructure services, such as waste collection or electricity, etc. So how should we, I mean, could you say a little bit more about that? Like, how should we analyze that interchangeability between sort of actually ethnic belonging or ethnic identity and access to infrastructure?
Okay, there is no interchangeably, but I will explain.
That's what you said. You showed in one of the interviews, though. Someone said, "I don't want garbage collection. I want to have."
This is something how the pro-Kurdish party promoted itself as a defender of, at the municipality promoted itself as a defender of Kurdish rights and justice beyond service provider. But I will answer both questions. The first one is when in 2009, when Erdogan's government initiated housing development project in Diyarbakır, it was part of their larger urban transformation projects that initiated beginning from 2005. But when it came to Diyarbakır, as I mentioned, they provided extraordinary compensations. Interestingly enough, this is part of a neoliberal urbanism discourse around the world, and it is happening. Not only in Turkey, but almost everywhere in the global south and also in the global north. What was very interesting for me to see when I was attending municipality meetings on this project, there was no comments from the municipality officers or the parties how this project will bring challenges to the lives of urban poor. But more, the focus was on, there were of course comments through the urban planners, but from the municipal level, they were very much concerned, and they saw this urban transformation project as a destruction of Kurdish culture. That was something very interesting for me to see how they perceived and how they also presented this project. Because one day I was in the mayor's office and he was talking to me that how he made a test to the governor by asking a fund to build an urban park. And the governor's office did not let him to build the park. 2 days later, I was in the governor's office, and the governor of that time told me, look, this urban transformation project is a test to these people. And it was very interesting that both parties were using the word test. And he said, look, this is a test. We presented these projects, and I don't understand why they are rejecting our projects. And he told me, how can you talk about culture, Kurdish culture, when 8 people are sleeping in the same room? That was the position. So in that sense, it is important for me to think more, what does this urban transformation project have been used and was perceived among the Kurdish movement. For your second question, I think the question was about. Can you repeat the question? I don't know.
Sure. In one of your interviews, you showed a quote from someone where the person you were talking to said, "I don't need garbage collection, or I don't need electricity. I'd actually just like to claim my identity."
Yeah, here it is that one. Yeah, this one. Yes.
So I'm wondering how you would analyze that kind of interchangeability that that person is bringing to the interview, right? So this person is actually seeing municipalities' collection of trash as being...
Because the Sur is very famous with its trashes. And oftentimes municipalities had struggles collecting the trashes because the streets are very narrow. And all of a sudden, in this interview, she said, I don't need, there was a debate, like why municipalities should collect, not collect, and all of a sudden he jumped and said, we don't expect any service, but we want our Kurdish identity back. It was also very striking for me, but it's also very important to see, and to see many comments like this in the city, that the Kurdish residents in Diyarbakır don't see the municipality as a mere service provider, a trash collector, or where they go and do their... They placed the municipality in their minds, it is, and the party, as the defender of their Kurdish rights. And one day, it was a 2012 interview, which was almost around the same time of peace talk. They really believed that they will have a sort of autonomy. Yes.
Can you say something more about the demography of the city? I mean, is it 90% Kurdish, 100% Kurdish? Would the movement of these settlers have changed the demographic profile of the city ethnically?
I'm so glad that you asked, because it is impossible to know the race. Because in terms of race, it is not possible to know. Because when demographic statistics are being conducted in Turkey, there is no race question. And it is also, of course, on purpose. But what we can say is since 1999, the pro-Kurdish party in the city usually gets over 65% of the votes. And even after the war, their votes dropped down a little bit to 57, but still they have been always dominant in the city.
But walking around the city, you hear people speaking Turkish, not just Kurdish.
Turkish, but there's a reason for that. Also, for several years, learning and speaking Kurdish in Turkey was banned. It was a domestic language. During the peace process, it was there was a flexibility, but that did not help the Kurdish language to be everyday part of the everyday life. But it's also interesting to observe during 2012 and 15, I begin to hear more people explicitly speaking Kurdish in the city, but also speaking Kurdish is a form of political stance. Even if they know Turkish, they begin to speak Kurdish in the city to represent their political position.
So last thing, these squatters have the right to vote?
Yes.
And if they move 20 miles out, they no longer have the right to vote within the
No,
municipality?
they still
have the right to vote.
And it would not affect the greater municipality election results. It would not, because they still have, it was still in the border of Diyarbakır, but the extended border. Yes.
Thank you very much. So my first question, I'll start my question by like kind of your last comment. So you mentioned about the difference between middle-class neighborhoods of Diyarbakır and the squatter settlements. So obviously the experience of the city, the state, police and municipality are different for these two different sets of people, right? The experience of Kurdish people of Yenişehir is different than the like Sur people. So I really want you to kind of unpack this Kurdish citizens or residents of Diyarbakır category, and also I think it's kind of but talks back to their relationship with municipality in general. And I like your analysis about municipality as acting both as a political movement but as a state. And while acting as a state, it provides some new opportunity spaces for political mobilization, but also some critical observers might say that it's also governmentalizing the political movement and making people more close to state infrastructure because like kind of they're going after people, making like investigations as a municipality worker. So what's your analysis with regard to this kind of municipality both acting as a political power, as part of political mobilization, but as part of state, and how does it affect the kind of political subjectivity that Kurdish, pro-Kurdish people cultivate? And last question, I'll remind you with keywords. Last question, so from many studies, we know, like, for instance, Charlie Oltar's work, many Kurdish people in Turkish Kurdistan, they are kind of involved with the state efforts to distribute social aids. They are frequent kind of participants of the social family bureaus or kind of other social services that provided for the state. Even for some, the stocky or the subsidized might be a kind of charming option, right? So are there any kind of discussions about this? Kind of one, for instance, one sect of the movement accusing other for being bought out, or that kind of a debate about kind of this ramification of being involved with the Turkish state's activities.
Okay, thank
Does
you.
it make sense? Okay, if it doesn't,
Okay, yes.
yes.
You want to? Okay, so let me finish this. So let's talk about the being both a political party and a social movement,
And acting like a state.
Perhaps the example, if we are more familiar with Hamas and Hezbollah, would help us to discuss and contextualize pro-Kurdish party. So very briefly, that they are different, but there are similarities. But very briefly, if we think about that, these, like let's take Hezbollah, they are movement at the same time party, and they have a lot of interventions in Lebanon. But what was striking for me was usually, not generally, but when these organizations, when they have the social movement aspect and the political party aspect, they usually articulate the mobilization through mostly providing urban services to the poor. So their working channels are, and it was in a very similar case in the Islamist municipalities in Turkey in 1990s. There is also very similarities in that. So what might be interesting for us to think about, according to my research, I had a chance to observe how the pro-Kurdish municipality worked on different urban scales, not only in the scale of urban poor or the rich, but also they were very good at building urban parks and organizing festivals. So they managed to provide unique urban planning and urbanist strategies for the catering for the different classes in the society. So it's not only the urban poor, but also they work very actively with the Kurdish business people, to a point that the Kurdish, one day I was interviewing with the Kurdish businessman, and he was introducing me his shopping mall that he just constructed, and he said, you know, what is the difference between us and New York? One day we will be the capital of Kurdistan. It was 2015 when the movement peaked. So, did I answer the question?
So then, what is the difference between these men who are kind of boasting about having shopping mall and the residents of the squatters?
That's the
unpacking
point.
this.
That's what I see, the creativity of the political party. Usually in the, I am following the theory, if we talk about the theory, the political articulation theory of Cedric de Leon and Cihan Tuğal, who argued that parties do not only represent the political votes or the vote represents the political society, but they also have the power to create a consent among the society. So that's something powerful to look at how the pro-Kurdish party was able to articulate and to bring different classes together in this movement. It is something striking for me because pro-Kurdish party is not a party of, well, he was taking the 65 or 75% of the vote. It was not a party of urban poor. It was not a party of Kurdish rich. Or it was not a party of upper middle classes, or it was not a party of conservative people. So it was puzzling for me how the party was able to bring these different segments of the society and articulate this very politicized Kurdish identity. Yes.
So from the standpoint of the central government, it's not a very good idea to have a pro-Kurdish party in charge of the city government, because of course the party will use the resources and power of the city government as part of the larger political struggle against the central government. I mean, that's what you would expect.
Yeah.
So after 2015, what has the central government done to try to limit either the ability of the pro-Kurdish parties to run the city or limit the powers of the city government so they can't interfere in the larger struggle?
Well, as you know, when Erdogan came to power in 2002, he had a very decentralized politics towards municipalities. And the Kurdish municipalities took advantage of, until 2010, took advantage of decentralized politics. Why? Because at the same time, Erdogan was constantly gaining power in the local politics and the local elections, and he was the one who wanted to turn this country under this urban transformation, urban development project. So he initiated a lot of urban laws that is favoring and liberalizing the municipalities. And the Kurdish municipalities took advantage of these laws until 2010. And there was also a peace process in Turkey that the Erdogan wanted to sit down with the movement, but after 2010 things begin to change, and in terms of local municipal politics, and he began to take away the municipal powers, and because he saw that, okay, I don't need municipalities anymore. I have the TOKİ, Housing Administration of Turkey. I can manage all this urban transformation without municipalities. So he began to take the power away from the municipalities. So it was that process, between the period from 1999 until 2015, where the party took advantage of these urban laws. And when I went to Diyarbakır in 2015, I saw, for instance, Kurdistan flags and the exhibition of PKK guerrillas with the pictures in the middle of the city. That would be impossible today to do that, to do such an exhibition in the city, or even before. So there was a moment, and then Erdogan, changed the politics further and began to take away. But he also saw how the municipal power gave the pro-Kurdish party a lot of resources that they were able to mobilize the movement. Yes.
So I have two questions. One is maybe kind of trying to wrap my head around your response to Gökçe at the beginning. So were you involved in the community in the neighborhood while you were doing your research beyond your interactions with, say, like the planners or like the municipal workers and social workers? Like, I'm trying to get a sense of what it means to live in a neighborhood like this one. I worked in a similar neighborhood, like under a very different, sort of in very different
What do you mean by
context?
being involved?
So, were you like? Did you have a sense of, whether some of the people, although this is a very poor neighborhood, obviously, if there were also people who had some kind of middle class aspirations as to, they were tired of living there, being crammed in these, tight spaces, their inability to access, obviously garbage collection, or maybe, I don't know if sewage was an issue. I would imagine it was, like water, these kind of basic services, and the possibility of there being certain kind of middle class aspirations among this poor population, and the kind of demands they might have put on the municipality as opposed to the state in relation to these infrastructural services.
That was very interesting for me, because I would also expect to see that they would look for a better life. Of course, there were some looking for a better life, but how it was possible that very organized and militantly they refused, and they were the supporters of the party when the local elections are conducted, and that the trash is the problem, that they are, and there was not concrete complaints. Even I was spending my time observing in the municipality, walking in the neighborhood, living in one of the houses in the neighborhood. Yes, there was concerns about the poverty, but every aspect of almost all aspects of their poverty, from their laundry till their son in the mountains, were very much known and being taken care of. That's something very also interesting for me to observe.
So even among, say, younger generations, probably a little bit better educated, maybe, there's no sense of wanting to maybe move to a different part of the.
Let me give you a very simple example. So one day the Occupy movement also moved to Diyarbakır, and there was the Occupy tent movement. That's another chapter. But so what they wanted me to Turkish delight. Okay, so I brought Turkish delights, and I was there. They were sitting in the municipality of Urbanism. And I said, oh, okay, so you asked me to bring Turkish delight, and here it is. And then she told, don't tell Turkish delight, that's Kurdish delight. So that is the political engagement, even from an ordinary person's life, it was very high. It was very intense.
Sure.
If I recall.
Sure, but even then, this could.
Yeah, sorry. By the way, there are other cities where these type of Toki urban transformation project happens, and there is a resistance also against the Toki. For instance, in Istanbul, in Balat, but the type of resistance that happened here was not the same, and was the stronger, and it's more politicized and organized. There, it's usually the municipality is the one, because municipality belongs to AK Party, is conducting these urban transformation projects, and here it's the pro-Kurdish municipality. So there was a very big exchange. The governor trying to initiate this project, the municipality standing against it with the residents in terms of state power. Yes?
What would be a non-oppressive way of the state to try to increase the welfare of this squatter settlements? Because
Could you speak up? I'm sorry, could you speak up?
I did not see it.
Oh, sorry. What would be a non-oppressive way for the central government to increase the welfare of these squatter settlements?
What would be the
Oppressive way, no coercive way of the central government to try to increase the welfare of this squatter settlements? Because you say they lack infrastructure, as they said. What would be an alternative for them to try to better their lives?
Yes, that's true. That would be the participatory and self-help building processes that is used in different parts of the world, where through NGOs and the government provides funds instead of evicting the squatter settlers. They sit with the squatter settlers and then they redesign their houses and rehabilitate and restore their houses. There are particular examples of this in Latin America, and where the government officials, through NGOs, sit together with the settlers and improve their housing conditions. But of course, the dilemma is the squatter settlement usually sits in the very valuable property. Once upon a time, they were not very valuable property, but as the city expands over the time, those properties in the city became valuable in the eyes of the government, also in the eyes of corporate companies. So they want to evict the squatter settlements. For instance, in this case, the government wanted to build a very tourism hotel center in the middle of the Sur. So that there is the contradiction. Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. So you briefly mentioned that the Sur used to, once upon a time, shelter like multicultural population. So there was Armenians, Jews, and Assyrians, and you name it. So we know that the pro-Kurdish municipalities, comparing the many other provincial administrative in Turkey, are a lot closer to sympathy with, let's say, Armenians. And actually the party itself is like declared acknowledgement of the Armenian genocide. So I know that some samples, there were some churches.
Yes, they restored, the Sur municipality restored 2 Armenian churches.
Yeah, in collaboration with diaspora institutions and individuals. So, but when it comes to really to reflect, because I know that there are some conflicts on the ownership of some properties there. So, to what extent the local municipality officers would reflect this to the people of Sur, the current residents of the pool? So, had there been any like the concern, like, oh, wait a second, so we are doing all these, but what if some Armenian would come and claim the ownership?
In the beginning, in 2009, while they were preparing these preservation plans, there was a concern. As far as I saw and heard, I did not make the preservation plan, but as far as I observed, they were concerned about finding their real owners. But the pressure, because 2009 was also the years that there was elections, but the pressures was from the government, from the Erdogan's government, to begin this urban transformation project was so high. And I did not dig into that topic more, but as far as I know, those concerns, in the beginning concern was a little left away with the concerns that they won't be able to find the real owners, so they were acting quickly to giving titles, so the talking would, to gain time preparing this preservation plan, and talking would also have to pay something to the property owners, that they would really delay the process.
Who are they giving titles to?
Squatter settlers, because they were in the beginning illegal. Once they give the titles, they become owners. So once they become owners, the Turkey had to pay them, the Erdogan's government had to pay them to initiate this demolition. Yes.
Thank you. It's fascinating and thought-provoking. And just as a follow-up to Evan's point, that's actually a long tradition when it comes to gecekondus, that the municipality, for political reasons of various kinds, grants title to people who are squatters.
Yes.
And transforms them into owners, and then transforms the space into an integral part of the municipal fabric. But I wanted to ask you about not the municipality, not the government, and not the central government, but the civil society organizations that were also active at that point, particularly women's organization, I think it's Kamer, that actually starts in Diyarbakir and starts in the east among Kurdish communities. So does
Kadem
that,
or Kamer? Are talking about Kadem or Kamer?
I think it's Kamer, isn't it? The women's organization that starts actually as an activist group?
Should be Kamer.
It's Kamer.
Kader is like.
No, I said Kamer. No, Kader's,
Kadem
Kader's-
was not provocative.
Kadem is different and Kader is different, but
Yeah, I know Kamer.
But Kamer
Yes.
is, the interesting thing about them is they start there and then move west, which is not the
Yeah.
traditional pattern. But do they play a role in this, either only among local women or with projects aimed at women and children, families, that somehow is working in spaces that aren't the ones that the municipality is trying to fill and aren't the
Yes.
ones that the government is trying to fill?
Exactly.
So how does that work in this bigger picture that you laid out?
Kamer is a great example. For instance, not directly founded by the municipality, but was aligned with the municipality. So because as in my talk I was talking about the organizations founded by the municipality and working between the residents and the municipality. But Kamer, like others, is a great example how they were also collaborating, civil society organizations, with the municipality. And there was a very strong link. Interestingly, that reminded me about Kadem. Interestingly enough, that time Kadem was a very pro-Kurdish in Diyarbakir organization. And when I went after 2015, I saw Kadem all of a sudden became an organization of the Erdogan's government.
Yeah.
So it's another topic, of course, but what Erdogan's government did was he did not cancel these organizations in the city, but he just swept them away. But he maintained these organizations and he moved his own constituents, like he's moving his own trustees to the municipality. He moved his own people to these organizations to continue their operations. That was until 2000. Now Kadem is, yes, it's the pro-government of Bikini.
And has Kamer maintained an independent identity?
Yes, it's maintained independent.
And has it managed, does it continue to function,
No.
do you know?
No, they almost stopped functioning after 2015. And same for the municipalities. Yes.
So I'm confused. I'm trying to figure out the political motivation of the central state of Turkey in all this. So they create this housing outside the city, supposedly, I assume, to disperse the Kurdish community and weaken the hold, to somehow that's going to weaken the hold of the pro-Kurdish party in the
Yes.
city. But then they're giving these squatters title to the land.
Who is giving the title?
That's what I was asking.
Yes.
Who is giving title?
Municipality.
Ah,
Municipality is giving the titles. And that's why there is like a state within the state.
I
And
see.
that's why the party capitalized on the municipal power. Because there is this, in Turkey, there is a central government, and in the city there are two authorities. One is the governor, and one is the municipality. And when the city is large, there are district municipalities and the greater city municipalities. All the municipalities in Turkey are elected through the local residents, but the governors are appointed. At the moment, when the Erdogan's government cannot have the control of the municipalities because municipal power is crucially important, they intervene to urban transformation projects through the hand of governor, and that was the case in Turkey. So Erdogan's government wanted to implement urban transformation project. They could not do it through the municipalities, so they empowered the governors to begin this project.
So we're gonna have to leave the room soon, so let's take these final two questions and then we'll wrap up.
So my question, I know you said that the areas where those squatters were living had become more valuable and lucrative. So is there any evidence of outside groups, like private organizations attempting like gentrification or like buying the land from the squatters, evicting them, and then like constructing something of their own there?
In terms of source, the source, since there was a war in 2000, everything, if it is being gentrifying, yes, it is gentrifying, but it's completely under with the hand of the government. There is the government, like the central government, Erdogan's government is the gentrifier. Since 2016, Sur and those new construction areas are blocked by walls. No one can enter them. They are doing constructions, and they are constructing new residence, hotels, tourist centers. But who is doing that is not the local contractors, but the contractors agreed with Erdogan's government. This is a sort of gentrification, yes, but it's not like South Boston, where it happens with a more open process. It is right now it's blocked, and it is completely being done through the government.
My question was very similar to his, but specifically since we're talking about, you were mentioning the expropriation of land under this urgent plan that changed after 2015. Are people being compensated at some sort of market rate, or is there a way in which the Turkish government is able to kind of devalue whatever the assets are, that once people are awarded title deeds, it becomes a fungible asset that they can sell? So what is happening in terms
in
of
2017, they were promised to compensate it. So this urban transformation project, which began here, right now, all this part of the city is blocked. Last summer I was there, I was able to enter for a couple of hours, that was it. You had to take permissions from the police, and there are police forces, but what are they doing really is they are destroying the destroyed houses, and they are building these new projects. They are not compensated. They were promised to be compensated. They are still promised to be compensated. They haven't been compensated.
Where did those people go?
They went to their relatives' houses when the war began, or friends' houses in Bağlar. There's another squatter settlement in the city. So they began to live with their relatives' houses. They migrated to other locations. Some of them came back, but none of the people who migrated, who once upon was living here, they come back to these new developments. They were not able to come back.
Let me just conclude by telling the students in the room that Professor Güvenç teaches a wide variety of courses on contemporary and modern architecture, housing and social justice, Islamic art and architecture. And I encourage you to, if you want to learn more about these topics, keep an eye on her classes in the bulletin. So please join me in thanking.